A very warm welcome for those of you who are not here before this grand gathering. You are now at the Hungry EcoCities Grand Gathering. And Hungry EcoCities is a EU project that we have been working on for the past 3 years. And we is EatThis, my name is Renee, but also international partners from Belgium, Colin from Italy, Monica from Czech Republic, from the Netherlands. So we're here with a truly international team. And for us, Koppert Cress, where we are here now, is kind of our home base. We think there's only one company in Rusland where you can organize a true grand gathering. A lot to do this afternoon. I hope you studied the program well. We will have a feedback to look back on the project. What is or what was Hungry EcoCities? What will it be? We talked to Cameron Steele. More welcome to you, our special guest. And that you will proceed upstairs to the jungle. But as I said, there's only one company where you can be. So, Stijn.
So happy you're all here, Carolyn. Welcome here at Koppert. I'll keep it short because we're running a bit in the program, and I do have the opportunity to finish at the end of the day. I love having the last word, so saying that. I'll try best. Be quite a journey since this idea started. It started there in this room right behind me, when Koppert Cress was asked to play a role on that. Knowing a little bit what was ahead of the future and how big the ideas were. So let's make it a little bit bigger and let's see if we can get EatThis involved on this whole project. And they're really the stars of what's going to talk about today. So let's give the word to Rodolfo and Aart to talk about today's project. I'll speak to all of you at the sessions.
Yeah. Warm up applause for Rodolfo.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Happy to see you all. That also people that are online. There are people watching at the moment. They've been waiting for a few minutes, but we're excited here. So, Rodolfo, we are going to talk about Rodolfo is sort of the mastermind of this project. And that was said together with him 5 years. I was wondering what did you think? How did you come to this project and how did you get going?
Thanks, Aart. So nice to see all of you here. So yeah, this is all just easy, Today is for many of us be part of this project a celebration because officially, I think it's tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, it ends. 2.5 years back, but it's also sad in a way because we did so many things. And it's nice to start the story, it's a very rich story with deep what you said because it started here and it started in your mind. This project. Yes, and you're both here off front row, and that's great at the end of it. So, very briefly, Hungry EcoCities is an EU project, EU funded. In 2 sentences, the EU funds a lot of programs. They do it through sort of vendor-like structure, horizon programs, and they basically call out to organizations, for collaborations, and come up with ideas on what to work on, what to research, and what to prototype. And there were 3 elements in this project. So the first one was given by the European Commission. It had to be about AI. And I guess you've seen all those things today. And if you go into what we did, you will see much more. But that was a given. That was on a choice. The funny thing was, we started writing this project. It was 5 years ago now, 4 years ago. So the AI didn't think that it was today. So actually, it was quite interesting. Also, it evolved. Then it was about food. And food was a choice. Didn't have to be about food. We could have done this project about aviation, about aerospace, about moon landings, whatever. You're free the topic. But I read your books, Hungry City and Sinopia. And a couple of things on those books struck me very early on. One of them was, and there are many things, if you haven't read them, you should definitely read them. They're already a few years old, but that doesn't mean they're less relevant. One of them is that in your book, you said, there is an important paradox between humans and nature, right? We have to manipulate nature in order to feed ourselves or in order to thrive. And I find it quite an interesting paradox to work on with a diverse group of people. So that was the first one. The second one, and that was even more, and I'm paraphrasing it now because I very had a memory quotes. But the second one was that you said in the book that we have these brilliant technologies, more brilliant technologies come, and they can actually help us in many ways, but they will be less than useless. And that's the part I remembered. Less than useless if this technological innovation doesn't go hand in hand with spatial evolutions, with societal evolutions, and with human evolutions. And again, sorry for not having it correct. But that last part, less than useless, I found that very fascinating. So that means that if we just blindly go out and develop these technologies to bring them into the world, not only will they be useless, but they will actually have negative consequences, negative effects. And that brings me with the third thing that we had to do with, or that we chose to do in the Hungry EcoCities. We were also asked by the European Commission to set up this multidisciplinary approach towards innovation, right, and experimentation. And that came from the STARTS ideology. STARTS has been a larger EU initiative, and it was all about bringing disciplines together, scientific disciplines, industrial disciplines, technological disciplines, and artists in different fronts and varieties. And that led me to think like, oh, if that is so important in the food domain, then it makes total sense to do this transdisciplinary. So we started creating the project, and first thing I thought was, we have this beautiful Westland area next door, eventually, because we're from Rotterdam, and that is where it happens. So I need to find somebody who's leading in this area to start this conversation with. Well, I found your father, or then you, wherever. You wanted to meet me. That's how it goes. And in that meeting, you said two things. You said, yes, we should do this, and don't do it with us as an individual company, but do it with a larger organization. EatThis. And those were two very precise moments, because then all of a sudden we had a start in a consortium, we had a start in ideation, and things went very fast from that. We added 3 universities to the mix. 2 of them are represented here. Renee University of Technology, Pavel. You're here somewhere.
Over there. Where are you at?
Ah, you're over there. Sorry, nice to meet you. And AU Leuven is also here. Robin is here. AR researcher there. Mental University. And the last thing really that we put in is that we wanted to have creativity in the heart of production. Not only artists working with other disciplines, but through the bulk process. And that led us to ask 3 quite interesting creative minds with studios associated to them to be part of this. And you've experienced one of them today, because of Stefan Petema. You've experienced how creative he is during the lunch, for those who participated in the lunch. And the others are Colorate Associati, Monica here with us today, and Studio Other Spaces from Rodi. They couldn't be. And then you have all the ingredients for EU projects. You have an idea, you have an angle, you have a group of people, and you have a plan. And out of the 30 projects that were submitted, we scored the highest. So we got the funding, we started to work, and this is what we did in 3 years' time. We managed to collaborate with 10 SMEs. One of them is also here today. Monica, we have both from Instagram. We managed to, well, 2 actually, really is also here. From Axia C, sorry, shouldn't forget you, yes. 20 artists in total joined the program. Many more were part of the ideation and the reflection sessions. And with this ultimate group of, well, actually hundreds of people, we went through these 3.5 years trying to figure out what the food system needs in terms of technology to thrive. And the goal was never to change the force of the ship, because that's way too ambitious for what we were able to do. But a last ingredient that I thought about when we started this is Minister Fuller. Some of you may know him. He says you don't actually have to change the force of the ship. You only need to change the rudder. And changing a rudder can lead to eventually changing the course of very big ships, including those of food systems. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do. So all of the work, all of the experiments, all of the documentation that's available to them, they are out there, and hopefully they inspire you, they trigger you, they allow you to use it, to reappropriate it, to change it in any kind of way, because we hope that they can be these little initiatives, as broader changes, that ultimately has impacts.
It was only one question.
Well, read at 3-4 minutes. Let me ask a question back to you, right? Because I explained backgrounds and setups and the philosophy, but it's also a lot of artwork. And one of the most important jobs in this project was mentoring, right? So every project, and you know that, Jeroen, you've been part of this project as well. Every project had mentors, scientific mentors, and mentors from the different studios that guided you, that helped you think, that helped you reason, that helped you distill sense for whole sense. And we have one mentor in particular, and that's you, Aart, with a very strong entrepreneurial background. You are an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, I think I must say. You've set up companies, you've let go of companies, you've helped many companies, and many creative ideas have come through you and have been influenced by you, but you've never before worked with artists on innovation. So maybe it's nice to share a bit with them how you experience this whole part.
That's true. No, thank you very much. Yes, either come from the food and vegetables sector. So we sold our company 2000 and I started with other companies. Not only the Netherlands, but also abroad, like in Africa, Latin America, production companies. We also started at academics, for, say, loans exploitation for trainings, for education in developing countries. And well, I'm born and raised here, so I know that, let's say, the whole infrastructure that's here, the whole ecosystem that is here, which is, well, we can consider that as top notch if we look globally. And what we also see is that we can do a lot of things in the tech, tackle global challenges. That's part of the project as well. Stated, it's also part of the project. After Rodolfo's stuff he said, and imagine that I'm extremely proud to be part of this for the last 3.5 years. This means a very nice opportunity to not only work with the artists, but also work with Stefan. We started project with us, asked by the day, had to join in this project. Just it's not a full-time job, of course, but it's extremely rewarding. It's, of course, you learn a lot. You learn about working artists. You learn about working with universities, of course. With universities, I've talked before. That's strange. And also the combination with the private sector. First, we started with 10 projects with artists, and Jeroen was one of them. And that second part of the project was working with artists and SMEs. So we connected, we matched basically the digital creatives. It's another name for artists as well. And well, maybe you recognize that if you come from this area, if you, let's say, have in the grown-up working in the company in agriculture, and you're a technical guy who is working on the office, they sometimes have difficulty to communicate. You need to talk the same language that you. So blending also university. I think that universities, the private sector, and you have the creative sector. And that's a real challenge to sort of let them talk to each other. But if they do, then you can come to beautiful things. And this is, I think, the result of 3 hard work altogether. That's a short answer, maybe, to your question.
Thank you for the sake of time. Actually, we skip a little bit. Prepare that we got Rich.
Ja, ik providing it information.
Things are popping up in the background. We want to create a bridge and also create a circle, because I share a text. We started with what the ideas of you, Carolyn, still, and we are particularly proud that we can also end with them. This journey. You will probably also introduce yourself a bit, but I would like to introduce you a little as well. But before we do that, I would like to highlight 2 little things that you are all going to get at the end of today, which are 2 books. So as if you haven't had enough information, you will get much more. One of them is super fresh from the press, and it arrived yesterday. And I think we're the first place where it's gonna be ended out is a starts book, 10 years of starts. And many of you are in there. You're in there, Jeroen. You're in there, Boanadaka. Laya, you're also in there. Many of you are in there. So from 10 years of these kind of projects, not just in foods, but also in manufacturing, also in logistics, also in music, quite a lot of different areas. The best things that happened are summarized in here. And we have a topic for all of you, so please don't forget to take one with you. The other one is a book that Leah and I wrote ourselves because this was about AI, which means we also got to research a lot about this topic. And we compiled our vision and our lessons and also a lot of the examples of projects in Hungry Cities into this book called Linking Together with AI. So if you're Dutch speaking, which I think most of you are, you will also get a copy of this on your way out. So much for branding. That's the branding part. Now we'll go over to you, Carolyn, because video books are full of very inspiring things. And now I want to get this right a little bit more. Another thing that you write about and that you envision is the idea of Sinopia economics, right? And I'm really not doing justice to everything that you write about it, but in very short, token economics is for you, as I understood it, a value system that we base on the intrinsic value of food. The intrinsic value of food. And that already holds us up a lot of pressure. In fact, what is that? What is value in relation to food anyhow? And how can it be intrinsic? Another thing that you put in there is that you say, actually, well, forget about technology. That's not the area where we must invest and invent in at all. We need to invest and invent in humans, much more than technology. But still, you're not letting go of technology because you are reflecting on it and you are using it, but not as a purpose, as a goal itself. Always from the lens of humans and how humans live well. And we're very proud that we managed to strict you and to capture you and to ask you not just to share your story here with us today, but also to reflect from your perspective on Hungry EcoCities. You've watched all the films, some of them multiple times in the last couple of weeks and months. And I'm very much looking forward to hear you speak about your thoughts, your ideas, your work, and then how our work resonates to this. So a warm up for Carolyn.
Well, many thanks to Rodolfo for that kind introduction, to Stijn for hosting us, to Rodolfo and Leo for being inspired. I have to say it's all quite surreal for me because I stood at the end of a 4-year-long EU-funded program that I apparently am side responsible for. So it's kind of it's Wild West territory for me, but it's very heartwarming. And so of course to Aart and Renee for hosting me and immersing me in a horticultural process that I'm halfway through, and I'm really can feel myself turning half into a kind of perfectly grafted tomato. That is very, very fascinating, wonderful to be here. Thank you. I basically would like to share with you, in a sense, a kind of concept that I came up with now probably about 20 years ago, at least, which is this concept of Sinopia. The drawing you've seen was a drawing, it was actually based on a drawing that I did when I was trying to work out kind of two things that are sort of interlocking. So one is where food sits within our world, and one is where we sit within the world of food, because it's kind of both together. And being human, as Rodolfo said in his introduction, is paradoxical and irritating because we have this bizarre relationship with nature that food really embodies in many ways. So it's absolutely an astonishingly powerful tool for thinking about really all the big questions that we face in life, but also reflecting on, what a good life is and what life itself means. For me, it's just an astonishingly powerful tool. So I will explain later how I came up with this word with the drawing that Rodolfo showed you, and indeed has. Oh, that didn't work. I have to point it somewhere, presumably. I should have obviously how to get this out, yeah. So, all right, fine. Next slide, please. The drawing that Rodolfo was showing you is actually, it came from a very bad. Well, this is actually quite a bad drawing, but the much worse one that I did when I was trying to work out, as I say, where food sits within our world, and somehow where we sit within the world of food. And I just drew, obviously, as you can see, an oval with the word food scribbled in the middle of it. And then some, I don't know whether for the English audience it's better if I gesture towards this one, or doesn't it matter? Doesn't matter. Okay, good. Oh, that one. Right. Can you all still see? Okay. So the basically people, the common of kids actually sitting around the table sharing food. Actually, weirdly, I have to do it on this one. Sorry, it's just I seem to want to hold my mic in my left hand and gesticulate with my right. I hope you can still see enough. And obviously, the act of eating and sharing food is fundamental to who we are. In fact, it's the situation in which we became human in the first place. But it's about sharing, communication, listening, and all the good stuff. Learning to be socialized. But of course, the vast majority of people in the world now, these days, don't produce most of their own food. We can rely on people like Stijn to do that for us. But within the home, when we're growing up, we are cared for by someone. Usually our parents, not necessarily. But the parents look after us, they nurture us, they care for us, and on the way back, we hope they receive, love and gratitude and so on. But this is obviously to a certain extent kind of idealized cartoon version of what it's like to grow up by your parents cook, where, most of the time these days your parents don't necessarily have the time to cook or the knowledge, but nevertheless, inherently, to the degree that it does happen, it's about profound kind of nurturing and loving act that your parents can do for you is to cook for you, to look after you in that way. But of course, if that is the space of the home, it is not the space anymore when most of us produce our own food, and therefore where does it come from? And again, the majority of people globally now is some kind of market. Obviously not necessarily a market with people with jolly aprons on that you can actually talk to. In fact, usually a supermarket, which was designed explicitly to exclude the human from the process by setting food, which the story I don't have time to tell properly today, but that's what happened. And then, of course, we're seeing already a huge number of exchanges taking place, so knowledge and competition or cooperation, actually, in the Netherlands, as I understand, between producers and sellers, but also a massive economic engine from the home to people selling food, and then money, trust, and exchange coming the other direction. So, of course, we're all looking at a system. And I've never studied systems design in my life, but systems designers keep telling me that's what I am, because food, of course, is the ultimate system. Anyway, so we're in a market. Where do markets sit? They sit where people come together. That, of course, again, increasingly now as a city, it used to be. But the city sits in the thing that we call countryside, which I'll talk about in a bit. We're in a very, very extraordinary, this is what you might call countryside now. It's just full of greenhouses with increasingly purple lights. So not fluffy hills of trees, which is what English people think countryside is, but they don't really think about countryside at all. Anyway, and of course, the relationship between the city and the countryside is really, I would say, the great engine of urban civilization. It's not just food that is sort of the exchange between these two areas, but effectively raw materials and all the stuff of life coming into the city and the countryside, and many of the waste products from the city going back out into the country. But of course, all of this, so this drawing, I'm not trying to do it on those drawings, but I mean, this drawing is basically a drawing that tells you that in the plate of food in front of you is the universe. That's what it's basically saying. So it's like ripples of effect and ripples of consequence coming out from that plate of food. So this is really just scales emanating from that plate of food. And that the actual edge, of course, is nature, the thing we call nature, that ever since the Enlightenment we've effectively imagined ourselves to be part from. Of course, we are part of the natural world. That had to PCUize us on a daily basis, because the stuff we eat comes from the natural world that which exists. We are literally made of food. Though, of course, the outer ring, the biggest ring, is to do with the fact that we are on a planet which is effectively a rock form with fire in the middle of it, hurtling through space and rotating, which gives us day and night, seasonality, all the rest of it. So that innocent-looking bowl of soup has an extraordinary map within it. And I often say that, to say that the universe is in a place of food sounds like poetry, and it is quite a poetic idea, but it's also literally true. And that's the power of food, that it's something that we engage with every day. We all eat, we all care about food to an extent. It brings us pleasure. We're literally designed to be rewarded for eating because it's necessary. And yet within it is everything else that matters in the living world. All living things eat. And effectively, all living things eat each other. This is the thing that Darwin pointed out, that they're tree right at the time, but it's true. So it's a massive, the most powerful living system. It also affects not just our landscapes and our cities, but our bodies, our habits, our emotions, our economic relationships, our politics, our climate, everything. So that's the piracy. It's simple, it's intuitive to us, and yet it affects everything that matters in life. So that is why I thought this kind of world needed a name. I gave it the name Sinopia, and I'm going to have to go back one, sorry. So you can make it work from there, but I can't make it work from here. That's kind of paradoxical. Where are you pointing it, though? But anyway. Fantastic. But anyway, so Sinopia just comes from the Greek sitos, or the Greek word for food, chokos, the Greek word for place, Sinopia, and it just, all Sinopia is it's the world as it is shaped by food. But that is the entire living world. So that's a lot of stuff. And I had surveying, as I say later, already probably had half my channel of inductees. Like, anyway, it's normal. But that's the drawing that I did, as I say, out of which the structure of my book Sinopia came. So it goes from food to the body, the home, the market, the city and the country, nature and time. They're the 70 chapters of the book. Now, as I said, it all comes back to, if you like, the oldest questions. There are the oldest, I should say, practical questions. Because obviously the question of why do we exist is also a long one. But less practical than how should we eat, how should we live. I've shown you these pictures of the Hadza in Tanzania, which are some of the few people on the planet who are probably more visited and studied by teams of researchers than any other humans on Earth. Because they still deal partly as hunter-gatherers. We're discovering all sorts of things about them, like they have an incredibly rich microbiome, for example, and lots of microbes in their gut that we think to do with obesity and, satiety and so on, but some that don't exist in the West. Anyway, what I love about this particular picture is that this breed of hunters is doing what all humans did until about 12,000 years ago, which is, basically since we started doing, which we think from about 1.8 billion years ago, of gathering around fire, and using fire indeed to modify the landscape, but crucially using a fire for heat, warmth, making a place in the landscape that we could call home, effectively, that could protect us, but also crucially on which we could cook. And I don't know whether to start recommending books to you, but there's an amazing book called Catching Fire by Richard Ranger with a W, W-R-A-N-G-H-A-M, which is actually fascinating about what it did in our evolution when we started to be able to cook food. because it totally changed the dynamic between us and the landscape. Because we were able to specialize in hunting. Hunting is a very high reward, high risk way of feeding yourself. Because if you're running after animals and you spend that energy and then it gets away, you don't have dinner. However, if you've got another group of friends back at camp, you say, don't worry, Dottie, you go off hunting and I'll stay here and I'll reach around for some tubers and I'll stick them on the fire. And then if you come back in the evening, this is the women, obviously. You come back in the evening, you haven't been successful hunting. I can still feed you. And then you can fill your belly, go to sleep, and go out hunting again the next day. So that it became possible for humans to become specialist hunters. And this is a total game changer, because it utterly transformed the diet. It's why not eating meat is such a struggle. That's a long conversation as well. But basically, if I say you hunt, I cook, is the oldest social contract in history. And it also gave rise to what I think is the most powerful human situation, which is eternal, which is the sitting around a fire or just sitting together and sharing food. And when it's emerging more and more how powerful the situation is, this is where we evolved language. Within any species, apart from apparently the bonobos who do it as well, but you share food nicely. So you learn to share food nicely, not just having a screaming match over it. Seeds do if it's lucky enough to catch a monkey, for example. Table manners, in other words, are how we became cooperative, communicating beings. It's so fundamental. I often say this is the situation to which we're always struggling to return, because you're never happier or more secure in who you are than when you're sitting with your tribe, your family, your friends, securely, safely somewhere, sharing food you love, telling stories. It's our happy place. It's like we go there to recharge, like a human base station, something. Putting your phone on a charger, this is how we recharge. And if you think about it, every important event in our life, we're sitting underneath Stein's wedding table, apparently, which I still find hilarious, especially kind of cake washing up there. But every important event in our life, every celebration, anything significant, or even if you want to sort of get to know someone, let's just go and have a meal together. It's absolutely fundamental to who we are. But of course, this is completely inseparable from another question. This talk's going to take 4 hours at speed up there, and I don't know what to do about this. Well, anyway, sorry. So I'll just be used. But it's a completely inseparable from the other basic question, if you like, part of it. And of course, when I say for most of human history, we live directly in nature. I call it living in the larder. In fact, all right, can you buy instruments? Living in the larder. So, for most of history, humans were hunter-gatherers, and they lived directly in nature, and the land fed them directly. And there's a huge amount I could say about this. I think I'm going to sort of shortcut it to saying really two things. One is that all of our needs as humans were satisfied, and it's becoming increasingly clear. In fact, since the 1960s, roughly, the whole story of what it meant to be a hunter-gatherer has completely transformed. So up till the 1960s, the story was life is terrible, until we started farming and getting technology and getting more smart, and then life got better and better and better. And now I would say that narrative is pretty much reversed. So the narrative now is life was fantastic, and then we started farming, and so it got worse and worse and worse. Now, of course, we can debate that forever, but the short story is that there is no accident that Adam and Eve, if you take the Christian story, are punished by being banished from the Garden of Eden and native farm. Because farming was much harder than doing this. I have to add that it's thought that there were a maximum of 10 million people on the ground, roughly when we started to farm. So the maximum human population sustained just by hunting and gathering was not very big. I mean, basically, sort of 70% of the metal. It's not very many people. But they lived in all the best bits, and they used fire to watch the landscape, and it was magical food. And in fact, if you interview SEDs, as I say, any vivid hunter-gatherers basically spends their entire life while being interviewed. If an interview with hunter-gatherer, they will tell you extraordinary things. They will say, the parent is abundant, it feeds me, it is my mother. Literally, they'd use that terminology. So it's exactly the opposite narrative we now have. Farming introduced a scarcity narrative, because from eating roughly 300 different species a week, we went down to eating about 5, and we had to protect these. Domestication, I don't got long enough for this talk, but domestication, a really fundamental thing in what we did. The reason why we live in such a paradoxical relationship with nature is that we started to domesticate plants and animals. And that's very much part of what farming is taking something to the natural world, it's modifying it, and it's making it dependent on you. If you take away the spiky bits, or you make seed put bigger, or you take horns off the cow in a type of and you make these plants and animals dependent on you, you welcome them into the human world and say, come and live with me. But that means you're responsible for it, for the orchard, the pasture, it's not us getting at it, as we'd be discovering in the last couple of days. And it puts us in a very, very paradoxical place. We're literally nature, are we wild, are we domestic? What is our place in this extraordinary complex world? Anyway, that was all in the future at this point. So, as I say, the humans who lived before we started to farm, we now appear to make leading pretty good lives in many ways. Of course, they didn't have iPhones, but you can't have everything. Anyway, this is where it all started to change. Incredibly complex story that I do, so sort of criminally reduced down to about 5 sentences. But when the world last went through a major climate crisis, which was about 12,000 years ago, especially, it started to warm up after the last ice age. And in various parts of the world, most critically in the Near East, ancient Near East, the rich forest that actually had been the real Garden of Eden, interestingly, started to recede north. Population grew because it was warmer. People were running out of food. And they took the radical step of starting to take the saving and planting of seeds seriously. So up until that point, people had done what the late great David Graeber calls play farming. Play farming was basically finding grass seeds and just chucking them in a sort of wet, muddy bit of ground and wandering off. And then coming back maybe a year later and going, oh, food. Putting no person meat in it at all. Because, of course, the other critical thing I should have said is that if you live as a hunter-gatherer, you wander around territory, you don't stay put. You eat all the nuts and berries and kill all the animals safely, and then you go somewhere else, and you may come back only a year later. Two, as I say, certain people, particularly we know, for example, the Kasalkuyak in Turkey, they did this. They would just chuck seeds in the mud of a river as it receded, and then just come back a year later and go, funny, it's a snack, But now they had to start taking food, farming seriously. So, as I say, beginning of mysterious domestication began, breeding plants, saving the bigger seeds, slowly getting rid of the defensive plants, stone defenses, and creating fields, and therefore, taking a pitch of land and turning it into agricultural patch that then had to be defended, because you've invested in it now. You can't just wander off. You have to stay put. So the beginning of, people did lead sort of lives that are more or less based in one place before. It was very, very fertile. Like here you're looking at the delta of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, very, very fertile land. That's why I'm interested in the use of the word tell so that we can come back to that. Anyway, eventually people would sort of find enough food to stay put, but with farming, it became obligatory to stay put. So we start to see the proliferation of static settlements, static agricultural settlements over the course of many centuries. It eventually become complex enough and evolved to the point that all archaeologists agree they deserve to be called cities. Sorry, should I try and short this sentence or something as to be talking about explore? So the thing to say, the big takeaway from this image is that around 12,000 years ago, The beginning of the domestication of ox animals for food for dam, dogs self-domesticated a bit earlier, weirdly, it's not a story. And in this area, known as the Fertile Crescent, because it was crescent-shaped tree fertile, the naturally occurring ancient antecedents of modern grains like wheat and barley were in fusion. And this is where farming starts to take it seriously by humans. But over time, farming and urbanity co-evolved. And you can't have cities without farming. And this is a long argument, and people are there's lots of nuance in this. But to have big cities, you need grain. Grain is the food of cities. That's my kind of, I've already got an hour kind of takeaway. I've only got 45 minutes now, but after bread probably. Voila. Now, so what were those cities like? Here's one of them I'm just pointing to. And you immediately see certain characteristics. It's very small. It's very dense. It's not un-Dutch in many ways. If you look closely, you can see this bit of excavated residential barriers, mud huts very, very close together. Don't look at windows. Actually, there aren't any windows. They have courtyards. It is on a river. It's surrounded by farmland. So the river is obviously necessary for water, but also for fertilizing land. It's surrounded by a wall because the Mesopotamian rivers moved around a lot. They meandered. And then it's dominated by this large temple complex. And if you look closely, you can see about a quarter of the temple's land is an enormous granary. And the granary was like central bank of the ancient city because the grain was the most important substance the city dealt in. It's vital, critical. And the temple actually was responsible for bringing in the harvest. So not only did the temple organize a year-long season of festivals that mirrored the agricultural seasons, but also they organized actually the physical bringing in of the harvest, decide which fields were going to be lasted first. Grain brought is offered up to the gods of the temple. They didn't tend to eat much, that's why that was. Then it was stored in the granary, and then during the course of the year, it was basically fed out to people. So if we were going to say, how did first cities in the world feed themselves, we would say, first that they were city-states. That is, I often call it finite model urbanity. So if you think of the Yodeminette as the kind of the city, and the one should be as the countryside, it's that kind of model. This is endlessly repeated. But also dominated by what we now call a large, centralized, spiritualized food hub. And it's a very effective model, and you see versions of it repeated and repeated and repeated, as I say. Now, of course, living in cities, unlike living directly in nature or living in the larger, as I call it, breezes a problem. This is Aristotle we're looking at here. Aristotle famously calls humans political animals. And I love this term because it sort of brings up the two sets of needs that we have as humans. We're political, this means we're social, this means we need each other. It'd be very sad if I was here on my head. We need each other. We're sociable. We have to be living in groups to be our best. But we're also animals, which means we also need the natural world. Now, if you're living in a small cooperative hunter-gatherer band, you can satisfy all those needs in one go. If you're living in a city, you're satisfying the social needs, but you're starting not to satisfy the natural needs. And the bigger the city gets, the more you're not satisfying those needs because the further away it gets. Now, the Greeks were the first people to really confront this problem directly. Athens famously was a polis. A polis is a city-state. That means that the urban and rural parts of the city were equally valid, equally valued. And here we have a map. That's the urban bit of Athens, but it was surrounded by countryside. And citizens in the countryside had similar voting rights to people in the city. And both Plato and Aristotle said, how would an ideal city feed itself? And they said, well, obviously, it would practice what they call economia. Economia is household management. That's what it means. And the idea was that every citizen would have a house at the city and a farm in the countryside no more than a day's ride away from the house. And the farm would feed the house. So the house is self-sufficient. It's practicing good economia. And if that's the case for every citizen, then the city itself is self-sufficient. Hurrah! Job done. The only problem is there's a limit to how big the city can grow, because the bigger it gets, the further away the farms get, and you can't write there in a day anymore, so it falls apart. So basically, the Greek said there is a sweet spot to the size of a city where it's big enough to supply all the necessary functions of the state, but small enough that it can still feed itself, and this will determine the upper size of the city. They both came up independently with the size of 32,000 people, interestingly, which reverberates later on. That didn't include the roughly 7-to-1 slaves that were also necessary. And anyway, let's include that. The point is there's a sort of limit to the size that the city could grow according to the Greeks. Now, I normally talk endlessly about Rome at this point, but I took it out because I knew I was going to be overrunning already. But the point is that, scale was always a problem from the beginning with cities because of the problem of how to feed them. This Lorenzzetti we spoke about earlier, when it's Stijn or Stijn is, I keep putting a rib and shut in the desert. Yeah, Stijn, sorry. I just went. Stijn has kind of modern Dutch version of this wonderful image. It's Q section corridor. But just to say that in most cities, through history until the Industrial Revolution, were indeed small and were indeed sort of fed largely from their liberal hinterlands. And this wonderful image from 1338, which sits on one wall of the town hall in Siena, shows what is effectively a utopian relationship between the city on the one hand and the countryside that feeds it. And it's actually, if you look at the landscape at the window of the town hall at Siena's Day, the landscape still looks very much like this. Of course, we're looking at a thing called countryside because we're not looking at a natural landscape. We're looking at a landscape that's been heavily modified in order to be a city, so green fields, olive groves, and so on, vineyards. And we're also seeing very interesting arrangement in this painting because the city walk, which looks like barrier, actually turns out to be a membrane through which, you see hunters leading the city to maybe go and shoot a boar. We see asses with grain on their backs coming into the city inside a flock of sheep wandering around, or women with a basket of eggs and so on. So what you're actually looking at is an image of an active, symbiotic, dynamic system. So it's a partnership between the city and the country in which one needs the other. And it's actually the only image I know in which city and country get even billy, interestingly. And one of the interesting things about Vliet is that, of course, narratives historically have been written in cities. They've been urban. And the countryside's often been unseen or excluded and so on. Why suddenly in Siena in the 14th century is it visible like this? Reason, because this is a sort of an era in which city-states were reborn. There was a sort of flowering of city-states after the Roman Empire, which, really, thing is, there's no point in taking the slides out, and then I have to talk about it anyway. But Rome bucked the trend. Rome was obviously the first megalodolus, with about 1 million citizens, and it fed itself with a huge empire that used water transport to get the food into the city, and that's a very, very short version. It of course then collapsed, and for about 1,000 years, people really didn't exist at all. And then they came back in the city-state form, so it was another flowering of the city-state model. In any case, most cities, as I say, follow this principle, and it's sort of, if you look at the title of this fresco, it's very powerful. It's the allegory of the effects of good government, and it's in the town hall. So it's saying to the people, to the leaders of the hall, this is your job. Your job is to maintain this relationship, because without it, the city will fail. And when you see them, when you understand that it's actually all about food, you think, that's such an obvious thing. Why doesn't every town hall have an image like that in it? It's a fascinating problem. I even remember as an architecture student going and visiting this painting, when I was 20 or something, and thinking, oh, what a lovely landscape, and what a lovely image of the city, and wondering off. It never occurred to me that it was about food. Food's too big to see, because it's everything. We wouldn't be here without it. Anyway, one of the reasons we don't have images like that on our walls is, of course, as I say, it was a very brief moment when the city and the country were bound together harmoniously in that way. I mean, a modern Lawrence city looks more like this. It's my home city of London. You know, that's the kind of landscape from which much of its food comes. It's, you know, out of sight, out of mind. It's thousands of miles away. And it's so denatured that, you know, it's questionable whether you want to paint it and stick it on a wall anyway. And I call this the urban paradox. The urban paradox is the fact that, as I said before, you know, the more it becomes possible to move into cities and to live in them, the further and further away we get from our sources of sustenance. So we're getting better and better at satisfying, if you like, the social requirements, and worse at satisfying the natural ones. Of course, we're now getting really bad at satisfying the social ones as well, because they are, but in social media, that's a whole other story. Now, the first person who analysed productive hinterland at city was a German geographer and lander called Gerhard von Schulen. He wrote a book in 1826 called The Isolated State. He basically said, if you imagine a kind of fictional country that's flat, fertile, and featureless, but inhabited by logical, profit-seeking farmers, so I often say it's very like the Netherlands, and you stick a kind of imaginary city in the middle of it, how would its productive hinterland naturally evolve? He said, well, obviously, around and in the city, you're going to have market gardening. Because, you know, fruiting flowers, they're very difficult to transport very far, and there's a high value from having them very fresh and even out of season, so they can make use of, in one of the workshops I just attended, they were saying there's humanure, but the name of kind of human and animal, would, in this case, it would be even animal collected and put on the land to bring the fruit and vegetables on the head season, and people would pay crazy money for that. Well, and in fact, we saw in the museum yesterday hanging the grapes in bottles of water to make them last longer, so again, out of season, much more money. And then there's the kind of something like a 20 or 30 kilometer band of grain production. Grain, remember, is the critical food for the city. It's what cities have always been fed on. Problem, it's very low in value in relation to its bulk. So it's very expensive to transport. So beyond about 30 kilometers, it's just not economic to bring it into the city. This limits the size of the city. So then I have geography and economics working together. The outer bound is animals, because they can walk into market themselves. And it's actually historically the case that many cities were fed animals that could be bred hundreds of miles away. It's that board of earrings covered in trade roads, where only animals walked, not humans. They had different rates. The only concession to geography that von Schulen made was to say that if the city was on a river, then of course these bounds can expand, because it's much easier to bring the food in by water. About 40 times cheaper by sea, and about 50 by river. So much cheaper. You take grain, heavy grain to the river, and then bring it in this way, and then the city will grow larger. That's all very kind of academic. It gets much more, oh, did I do that? Probably. I have got rain. I thought I'd taken it out. This is very, very dangerous. Rain is my favorite subject. That's who he was talking about earlier. So massive city, look at the size, it's ludicrous. Million citizens by first century AD. This is how it fed itself. It's spread out. Grain is the most important food. Sicily, Sardinia, North Africa, Egypt, they all got sequentially conquered. And the only way it could feed itself was by sea. So as I say, 40 times cheaper to build it. Was I using the microphone completely wrongly before? That's much easier, isn't it? Don't you shout. So 40 times cheaper to bring it in. So it's cheaper to bring your grain in from North Africa than it is from, say, 50 kilometers outside the city. So we're starting to see the differential, transport costs, how that completely affects the way a city is fed. And just saying wine, pork, oil, oysters, fresh oysters, fresh Britannia. I call it City 2.0 because this is the first, megalopolis. It completely throws the old Friday after the art. Now, I'm the most interesting example, and I actually have taken these slides out, and I know that. But just to show you, here are two of the key ports, the river ports of the two biggest cities in 19th century Europe, the 18th century Europe as well. London on the left, Paris on the right. Can you spot an obvious difference? Well, I pour myself some water now. And the waters are clean. Just shout out. Like, yes. Wait, he said that. Well done. Did you read my book? Vliet Street. Very good. So basically, in short, London, the Thames is a navigable river. So you've got ocean-going ships on it. The Seine is not. It's 180 wiggly, wobbly, muddy kilometres to the coast. Quite big that London, from the 9th century onwards, was getting most of its grain from Baltic. Basically from Poland to Ukraine, which effectively were Europe's breadbasket. And I mean, there's a huge Dutch story in there, of course, because you controlled the grain trade. So London was fine. Paris was not. Paris had to impose its will on the countryside rules, feed itself, and of course, when a tree harvest used to fail, the king was known as the baker of last resort. He was responsible for feeding the people. And when the harvest fell catastrophically in the 1780s because an Icelandic volcano went off, that's what happened. Geography. He couldn't feed the people, and of course they rioted, and we know how that ended. And I often say that, these two photos explain Brexit, although nothing explains Brexit. Then I have to sort of commit kind of, as it were, ceremonial-based apologies and other rituals for the idiocy of my country. But the thing is, we've got this global mentality. It's like, we'll just get it from somewhere. Free trade mentality. We just didn't understand that even though we have the capacity to trade globally, proximity matters too. So I apologize to all of you for us. All right. Anyway, I was keyed up now. Food shapes the city. So basically, not only did cities shape the hinterland through their need for food, but the food actually coming into the city shaped the city itself. So this is London, just analysed according to the various foods coming in. Fruit and vegetables, I haven't blocked up because it's just green, but you can see all around the city, all pre-industrial cities were surrounded by market gardens. This is grain in yellow, and you can see it's going to the river ports as it's coming in mostly by water because it's so heavy. Going up to Cornhill to be traded, Bread Street, obviously it's being traded already on the street up there. Fish, obviously coming by river, gates, courts of Queen Hive, Billingsgate. Billingsgate, of course, remained London's main fish market until the 1980s. So you see the longevity, you see the sort of the inertia of food systems as well. Fridays, food is being bought fish on a Friday when the eating meat was forbidden. Meat's called seasonal because we did had specially structured these casket going through winter, haven't learned from you yet. Smithfield is the meat one. The animals walking in from hundreds of miles away, Scotland, Wales, Yorkshire, good grass, of course, Guernsey sweet grass. Mostly. Some of them still do, not many. Coming in to the northwest to a smooth field outside the city, which became Smithfield, which is still London's meat market today, where it's about to be changed. And I think that's got to say about that. Poultry, because the turkey and the geese would come in from the east. So they're coming in this way, they can't be traded on the east side of the market at east. Poultry at east side of the cheap side. So food is literally physically shaping a city, and I've actually done this with a lot of Dutch cities. Just looking at them and looking at for Bread Street, Fish Street, Cow Street, all that. And then you can work out how the food is coming in, how it's sat within its region. Really. On Saturday night. Great. Wait, spend the time. Of course, critically, the markets were the centre of the city, centre of sociability. You had to go to the market to get fresh food. It really regulated. And you see various sort of aspects of the market and tell you it really being the place where public life took place. And that's Smithfield, when it's the livestock market. So you can see up to 10,000 animals were there at one time. Really, it's a great description of it in Olive Twist, all the bleeding carcasses and the noise of mooing and the sea of mud and steam. This I was actually talking about yesterday. This is Broyles White Tree Carnival and Lamps. Wonderful painting that actually really represents the degree to which the agricultural seasons were mirrored in the city. Because of course, you know, so that's Carnival. So fat bloke was sitting on a barrel of beer with some pig on a cloak and pie on his hairs. Obviously had a very time to the last month. Fighting off a wizard kind of figure of lens, actually bloke dressed up as a nun with a couple of fish on the pallet. And they're fighting for the spirit of the marketplace. And of course, Lent is going to win because we're preparing for the fast of Lent for Easter. That is the church's way of making people accept the hungry gap, the agricultural hungry gap. There's not going to be any food around. But of course, it's all of the promise of Easter, which is the coming again of first of the city. So the city is still mirroring agricultural seasons. Of course, it's also about hospitality. Most people in the historic city didn't have needs of cooking hot food for themselves, other than make slinging hot over a fire. So basically, cookhouses, takeaways, were a part of the city life right from the beginning. That's a very nice example of in Bermondsey in London in the 16th century. See, they catered for a wedding. So always take him up, but you know, it's otherwise similar. And you know, you can see Richie Street chickens, you can buy paper captions, so on. Basically, coffee houses were essential in forming a thing called public opinion. Because unlike tavern where you used to go Hyle one brook. So how long have I got? 3. It's already on. I'm already at time. Yes, okay. Sociability. So it all changes with the trains. So everything I've been talking about up to now is about geography, how geography affects the city. 3 key things change at this point. The first thing is cities are no longer constrained by geography, so they can grow in size and shape anywhere. Secondly, food becomes invisible, a problem that a lot of projects that we're going to discuss in a minute are trying to address. And thirdly, control of food, which had been city authorities' responsibility, now passes over to the food industry itself. Our politicians basically wave a collective bribery because they don't have to deal with this intractable problem any longer. So we see the immediate effects. London goes from being a city that's not much bigger than the medieval one to being vast metropolitan spurge in a space of 90 years after the railways. The productive hinterland is transformed. So, for example, areas of the so-called New World go from being grasslands being, grazed by bison and obviously Native Americans living alongside them, to mass slaughter, to the creation of the world's first ever monoculture, and then the invention of the so-called cheap meat, as we know as cheap tool. Consequences, the soil blows away, the countries go from grasslands being stabilized by ruminants to monocultural production. That consequences, soil blew off. It's the beginning of the vast conversation that we're still having about organic or industrial. The 2 fathers, if you like, of those 2 systems is the Sliebich, who was the first to map out plants need mostly NPK. Farben Bosch, who created a sort of way of artificially fixing nitrogen by replicating lightning strike. And Albert Howard, who was the first to, is very significant one of the projects I'll talk about in a moment. The mycorrhizal fungi and the connections in the living soil between plant roots and fungi, which are capable of getting micronutrients out of the minerals in the rock. And the plant will get up to a third of its sugars to fungi in exchange for micronutrients. So this is the living marketplace in the soil. The organic crowd were winning the conversation until war came along, and later comes, all long-term thinking goes out the window. It's all about short-term, see it with Ukraine as well. And it's when we went decisively down the chemical road, and of course, post-war, we also have seen the beginning of car cities that bear no resemblance really to where they actually talk. They're just little moddy houses planted all the best farmland, because of course all the city centres that it started from were in the good farmland, because you never put down anywhere you couldn't feed it. Because nobody walks anymore, so they drive to a big refrigerated box outside the city, which is the beginning of all. It's the first one ever built. designed by street architect, it's brilliant. He worked out people would walk 10 times further if they basically were in a refrigerated or air-conditioned box than in an actually city centre. So that's good, If profit is your motive, and of course food is the beginning of ultra-processed food. Food is denatured, so it can withstand the insane logistics. Of course, we have created a life and a world and a vision of a good life that is predicated on things called cheap food doesn't exist. And this is really almost critical to everything I think this whole project's been dealing with. The fact that we've created the most expensive in real terms food system humanity has ever known, and yet we think the food's cheap because we don't pay the true cost of this in the shops. And the external costs are high enough to actually destroy us and the planet. And they include great soil, climate, the gases, overuse of water, all the things that I know make people in this room are trying to deal with: overweight, dark making disease, zoonotic pandemics, waste, feeding great animals, vast amounts of energy being used, and of course, rapid decline of bird and insect life due to chemical use. Unfortunately, this industrial project is going global. You know this story. The reason is A, it's motivated by profit, and not anything else. B, the kind of fast food, smorgasbord, salt, sugar, and fat, small sorts of additives are basically things that our hunter-gatherer bodies crave and can't resist. So basically, some form of fast food can go global and is going global. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Short summary of where we've been. You've been looking at how technologically we've gone from living around the fire, using fire to cook and modify landscape, to farming, to fossil fuels, and now making it to the lab. We've gone from living directly in nature to living mostly on farms, to living mostly in cities, to a future where we might try to invent new forms of urban rural coming together somehow. It's gone from big people who have the high levels of individuals in an agency, to craft-based kind of world, to a screen-based kind of world, to robots. We're pretty much here. We're sort of in this bit. And we call it progress, but the interesting thing's got to be left behind. Are we happier? At which part I can't have possibly my favourite slide, a wonderful quote from the English architect called Cedric Price. He didn't build very much because he asked too many questions. Once famously, he was interviewing a married couple who just spent sort of three hours bickering at what size cupboards they wanted. And then he just turned to the buyer and said, Adam, you don't need to actually need a divorce. So he didn't build much. He's very clear that. But anyway, so here is the fight. Technology is the answer, but what's the question? Fantastic. What is the question? The question is the same old question: how to eat, how to live, how to do it sustainably, how to build a society. It hasn't changed. Obviously, in the context of cities, we've gone from the Greeks worrying about the size of the city. We've gone to Thomas More in the 16th century thinking London was getting too big and greedy and say we need something to go back to be the city-state model Tribex. So that's his utopian vision in his book Utopia. And Ebenezer Howard, Garden City fame, really is Thomas More with railways. It's saying you have to keep cities small, have dedicated farmland around them, and network. And again, it is the Netherlands, except of course in practice it isn't, but it could be. Now, this is how I came to value Sinopia, because I thought Utopia is great, it's fantastic, but it never actually comes to fruition because it's a joke word. Then I would eat a good place, you might come from the Greek word good, or the Greek word no. So it's a good place that doesn't exist. But I remember very depressed when I discovered this. But then I thought, but actually utopians bow our empathy to you live in a world shaped by sheets. It could be just have a city period instead, which comes, as I said, from Sitos, Topos. Because we do live in a utopia, we just live in a bad one because we don't value food. But if you do value food, it's amazing how utopia very quickly comes close to utopia. So it's all about valuing food. How does that work? There's a flow that's data our lives from the countryside to some sort of distribution system to some sort of market, kitchen, the table, and back again. And it's constant. And it is, if you like, the cycle of life. But it's far more complicated than that because every stage of that journey affects every other stage. So it's a very complex system that we all have intimate knowledge of, maybe not bits of it. So can't just cook anymore, for example, but if I cook pea soup for my kids and they don't like it, I'm not going to buy it for the market won't buy it for the farm, blah, blah, blah. So it's all of culture, all of complexity of life is in it. And within that, in a hugely complex system, we have infinite choices. Do we feed grain to animals and have them in CAFEs, concentrated animal feeding operations? Or do we just have a few cows eating grass, which is why it could evolve in the first place? Our target was an otherwise plant-based system. Do we eat the city in the name of efficiency or get our food delivered? Or do we actually alienate public space by coming into the middle of the city and talking to a human? Do we take time for food? This is one of my favorite stats before COVID. 1 in 10 meals in America was being eaten in a car. So it's kind of, we are just not taking time for food anymore. Or do we actually do how we evolve sitting around taking time to speak to each other, the phones in a safe, only the parents have the key to, etc. Because this is how we are and how reinforce our sense of humanity. And which of those then feeds into our idea of a good life, which is the question we have to be asking or not. There are obviously opposing paradigms of what a good life is. This is Soylent. How many of you have got Soylent? Very few. So Soylent is interesting. Soylent is a feed replacement sludge invented by a radio mass designer in California called Brian Hart. He was eating rubbish, and he suddenly woke up one day and thought, I'm a really bright guy, I'm eating total CRAP. Surely could do better than this. And he just looked at what humans need online, and ordered in all these chemicals, and he's put it together with cortisone and started political illness. And wrote a very, very funny blog, I have to say. Anyway, he nearly killed himself about 3 times because he had too much forgot the cute sink or something. Had to be straight. So, eventually not that. And he just said, everyone used to really worry about diet and pizza, but they seem to be kind of much more concerned now when I'm eating really well. Anyway, he wrote the blog called, How I Gave Up Food. So that's one paradigm. It's like the ultimate life hack. You just check your way out of the problem. Or, as Neniotis did on the COVID, do you actually rediscover craft? Do you go down that road and say, since we have to eat, why don't we enjoy it and take time for it and make it part of our lives again? And of course, these exceed two philosophical positions. That is wrong. He had terrible acne before he kind of went on to his feet sludge. And now look how gorgeous his skin is. But this is actually possibly my second favorite page. All the ones I come across in the century doing this. So this is wrong. Worrying about something as simple as food in the digital age is winners. Says Rob. I got that. I mean, the idea that food is simple, where he nearly kills himself. And, in a sense, reducing it to just that without seeing the bigger picture is fascinating. But a lot of people think this way. The opposite, in a way, pushing against Epicurus, who basically listed the stuff he wrote. Apparently about 20 Indians volumes got lost. So there's only about 60 pages extant to what he actually said. So I've actually read everything he said, which is, I can't say that any other philosopher. But essentially his message was we are built to be rewarded for doing what is necessary, and also there's nothing more necessary than eating, which is why we get pleasure out of it, and that's seriously wrong with us. So basically it's like the opposite, embrace necessity and get natural pleasure out of it, is his message. So anyway, these paradigms are out there. In a way, the kind of, let's check our way out leads to saying, okay, let's move to cities and eat radiation sunlight. But I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not like a silver bullet, because it leads our question of what a good life is. Or there's still 2 billion people globally who feed themselves on small farms. I don't think they're part of the conversation at the moment. People don't tend to kind of go in to eat them as what they think. Anyway, it's a huge issue, sovereignty, tatouage. I mean, I think for me, this is like there is no silver bullet, because humans, one of our great successes as a species is our adaptability. we'd learnt to live in astonishing variety and matters in these Arctic sort of ice flows in the middle of semi-arid areas and so on. And we even adapted our bodies to be able to eat explicit diets. So, for example, Marsa can eat milk without problems as adults. They're the only breed other than Europeans who have a genetic twist that allows us to safely digest milk in childhood. Or, the Inuit who have livers that have adapted, been adapted to make carbohydrates actually as protein because they eat protein. So they're very trendy, very keen. It's just the idea that there's going to be one solution for how to eat when we have all these astonishingly varied cultures, pieces of knowledge. And of course, as I keep saying, it comes down to value. It's somewhat ironic that there has to be a crisis for us to remember the true value of food. Second, all the people throwing vegetables and you get into these Cuba before the Soviet Union, Detroit after cars on the left. We're all types of people can or say spread their own food, but to remember the true value of food and to build new networks around them. Food planning has been a thing since about 2000. I mean, I'd say for about a century, people forgot food was a thing at all when they were designing cities, and suddenly they woke up to it again. And now there's sorts of initiatives I could talk, or have talked quite a long time, even longer, about food hubs like this is Packed Antwerp, very interesting. It's got urban growing, commercially, society, social growing, people being having lots to grow, the farmers market, food related businesses, embedding food diplomacy as Toronto, protecting and supporting we carry out farms like this example in Kenya, preserving local abattoirs as if we're going to farm with animals, which I believe we should. Especially, you need also the infrastructure to give them a good death as well as a good life. Preserving markets, and also the fact that this is actually not artisanal cheese shop in London. And it does it for the pandemic struck. We had artisanal cheesemakers in the UK that they had in France. It was all that guy, It just shows that when you value food, things can really rapidly change. Economia, I think what we need to be doing is thinking about economia 2.0. It's no absolute, I'm sure the word that's familiar to you. Can you think what the modern word is that this is the stem of? Yes, I mean, economy, exactly. So I think if we base our economy around food, as Rodolfo said in his introduction several days ago, I think we can really start to move towards a good city. It is about bringing the city and the culture together. As I say, it's not a new idea. It's an ancient idea. Greeks were banging on about it. Patrick Geddes, the father of regional geography, talked about preserving some slivers of countryside, so it's evolved in star shape. So you maximize the urban-rural interface. And this is really critical because as humans, our ideal place to live is with one foot in society, one foot in nature. However, make that happen, it can happen at any scale. Bringing productive slivers into the city again to Baan Vulture, proposed with a continuous productive land space, interrogating productive hinterland, as this scheme around New York did, and saying what latent productivity is there and how can we connect to the city. Or I'm sure many of you know this project, MVRD's like bonkers creative extension, Snijders, Hamara. We're beginning to get talk about it with the drink in our hands, I think probably best that one. The idea of bringing food production back towards the city or within the city. I call it creating landscapes for human and non-human flourishing. There's many examples. It's about working with nature, but it's also about bringing food production either into or near the city. Lots of examples. Forest Golf, Snowshell, Sinopia Farm. I'm involved in London. I've planted 2 plants there. And of course, I've got very far back. They're my missions. That's how it's lovely to be. Well, rooftop flipping it, a flat Brooklyn, rewilding in the UK. Lots and lots of different, infinite really projects and that we can talk about. Finally. Anyway, Hungry EcoCities, as I say, it's great honor and pleasure to be told that I was, partly, well, really, indeed a major inspiration to this program. And once I got the shock of that, I very much enjoyed, well, it sort of took me a long time to understand the program. I think people working on the program find it a long time to understand it as well, because I understand. But I love the idea of, breed technology, as I've said in my talk. As I said in my talk, I think, a huge amount of sort of things that we have to deal with and have to ask ourselves, and it gets increasingly the case, is what is our relationship with technology? And the Rodolfo you read out a quote from me earlier on, and it's true. I once really insulted a Shell executive at a TED conference because he sort of came up to me and sort of said, "You are separate husband." Sorry, I've tried to Dutch accent. I'll take that back. But he was so passionate about them to use. You have to separate half billion people. If we have to find a way, how do we see that? If he got any ideas, and I was exhausted because I've been in the bonds by days. And I said, I thought, I think what we need is a philosophy. And he just taking his right thought. How of his face back to the trumpet to where he explains it. We don't have time for this. Yes. So we go, I think he expected me to say, oh, do you know what I mean? He's just, anyway, that's how, like 12 years ago. But, like 7.5 years, isn't it? But our relationship with technology, I still think, and this is why I find this project so fascinating and interesting, is that we have this incredible technology, this group I've been seeing over the last couple of days, and what's going on in the Netherlands of horticulture is astonishing. We're astonishingly inventive as a species. We're also astonishingly stupid. And those two things just unfortunately live together. Never learn our lessons. We don't understand that. I would say, and the reason I love the historical man, sorry, I took so long. But the fact that we are still basically hunter-gatherers, this is a huge problem because we stopped. If you read your Darwin, what Darwin says is that basically the species that thrive are the ones that suit their environment best. And for millions of years, we got really good at living in a particular environment. Then we discovered technology, fired up tools, and then, it goes on from there. And we started, instead of evolving to suit our environment, we started evolving our environment to suit us, we thought. But I often say that the environment we've created is a bit like going to a group of 5-year-olds and saying, design your ideal world. It would be a sweet shop with toys in it. And we designed a sweet shop with toys in it as adults, and we think it's what our heart desires. But of course, what we don't understand is that if we only have what our heart desires, we're going to explode and destroy the planet. So, relationship with technology, huge. I think we're at a crisis point as well, because I have AI. I'm trying to write a book at the moment, one. And about 2 days ago, I wrote a sentence, because I'm trying to write about AI. And I said, anything I write about AI now will be possibly irrelevant by the time we read this. It's happening way faster than any book can possibly deal with. So this is interesting. I just what I did there can't be made on a scarf. Anyway, so the introduction of art. For me, the art element of this project is a bit like philosophy. It's a bit like that when I was trying to say to the shell of the rain on being bags. It's actually reflecting, it's taking time to step back. It's saying, what is our relationship with nature? What is our relationship with each other? And how can we use AI in the service of a higher idea, a greater idea, and not just as, this exciting new toy, So, I don't know how many of you know all the projects. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, but, they all addressed. There's 2 sets of them. One is humanizing technology. So that's indeed addressing what I was talking about. How do we make technology be a subset of the great human question? And also path to progress. So looking at how, we can, in different ways, reconnect, not only with nature, but also with sort of historical realism, working with nature or existing with nature that we're in danger of losing, we can bring back. And I think a lot of the projects in general, I would say what they predominantly do is they try in one way or another to restore value to food, which of course is a big theme of mine. Now, I did a table. I don't normally do tables. And to be honest, this wasn't really for you predominantly. It was just me trying to make sense of all of these very varied projects I was looking at. So I don't expect you to look at them in detail. But I've listed the projects, and basically it seemed to me there were themes that sort of many of them addressed, and many of them addressed multiple themes. So I just sort of started identifying them and writing at the top. It's probably too small for you to see, so I'll read it out. I said, does it use AI or tech to monitor nature? Does it use AI or tech to network information? Does it use AI or tech to construct something? Does it use art to communicate, to create empathy, or to restore value? Does it use biomimicry? Does it attempt to either reuse bio-waste or reduce waste in some way? And last, does it sort of focus on increasing and helping human sociability? I'm very happy to send this to anyone who wants it. I mean, it's, as I said, there's more for me trying to make that project. As you can see from the crosses, the vast majority of projects address these two of those categories, and many of them address actually even a majority of them. And I just took one quote as well from projects, and just the one that struck me as sort of in a way encapsulating it. So empathy rather than extraction, celebrating impermanence, giving people the capacity to recognize value, they capture it, industrial know-how, no longer gate kept, but given, and so on. So I mean, they are indeed Sinopia projects. They are projects that are doing what I'm in my work trying to suggest we need to be doing, which is to use food as a vehicle, not as a sort of object, but as a vehicle or a lever to ask all the big questions, to see how they're all connected, and to see that by valuing food, everything else that matters changes for the better, because food is life, quite simply. Which is why, by the way, expecting food to be cheap is so insane, because it's like cheapening life. It literally is that. Anyway, in a bit more detail, just 3 of those projects. I could have chosen, any of them. And these ones just sort of struck me, demanded that I sort of chose them. And I have time to talk about all of them. Bees Together, a beautiful project, which basically, looks at our relationship with bees. And I think we're increasingly recognizing that bees are, we've been abusing them effectively. And I think, they're critical to basically food system and indeed the whole of nature, because of their pollination services, apart from providing us with hay, certain species. But we're just taking them for granted. We know they're under threat. Many of them are dying off. So it's a sort of project that attempts to use high technology to monitor the bees under all sorts of different conditions, and then start to see how changes in climate, heat, or other factors start to change the way the bees are behaving when it starts swarming and so on. And logging that. So a huge amount of data is gathered. Of course, what one of AI's great benefits is the gathering of vast amounts of data. And then they're making it an object which is inspired by honeycombs, which I think is rather beautifully executed. And then within it, the data is put. So actually, it is both monitoring in real time what the bees are doing and then giving signals that a human can read. So there's a sort of artistic expression of saying that, and this is the quote, empathy rather than extraction. So it's actually allowing us, as humans to sort of get a sense of what the bees are sort of going through and how they're feeling. And a rather nice sort of a hugging bee object photo that expressing that idea. EcoStream, I probably just included this because as an architect, it obviously sort of any project that directly addresses the relationship between us and nature or the city and the countryside just appeals to me. Something I spent a lot of time thinking about. I think, it's very, and your beautiful building and your company that we're in. I said to you at lunch, the fact that you've got nature everywhere, it just changes how you feel. It's healing in itself. And I think the idea of bringing nature into the city, but also into buildings, it's powerful and necessary in a way. I particularly like this project that it talked about the mycorrhizal connections to plants and soil fungi, so it's actual to the natural nutritional cycle. And so gathering data about that struck me as hugely important. We can see that going on here. A venery is kind of, I think it's very speculative. How do we actually bring, plants and fungal intelligence into our way we think about architecture? And so that's a work in progress. But I do like the use of fungal material as waste products to make these kind of these bricks that out of which plants can grow. And actually, it reminds me of a lot of the sort of experimentation with growing media I've been seeing over the last couple of days. So I just thought it was a very nice mix of things that this project looked at, and a future in which tech and nature coexist in mutual benefit. I think is very much where we need to be headed. And I also thought this is a very useful project. As I said, the whole question of whether we have meat in the diet at all in the farm system at all is obviously heated. I believe we should, but actually, as I said, maybe at lunch in conversation, only on the back of an otherwise plant-based system, which of course is what traditional meat production always was. So it probably is close to the 80-20 sort of model. But this was a project working with these traditional farm-hand prosciutto makers, family farm, that do it traditionally, and it takes a very long time, and it's a premium product. But the question is, there are a lot of competitors now that make something that seems very similar. So how do they keep going, literally, and what is the value of what they do? So again, the project Peter Alexandri, he sort of used AI to analyze, to look at what was happening as the houses were developing, also comparing them to the industrial equivalent, and showing radical differences between them, which is really interesting. And then basically making a book, again, a beautiful artifact that sort of expressed, what the deep knowledge of craft, evolved over time, actually expressed in the difference that it made to the product and therefore the value of it. And again, quotes from him, making implicit knowledge, so the knowledge of craftsmen, explicit and teachable out of behind its crafts down. And like Breaker's title, giving people capacity to recognize value when they encounter it. So value, knowledge, skill, balance with nature, sociability. These are the kinds of ideas that all of these projects, one and other, were exploring. This is very familiar to you now, but you know what that drawing is, because I spent far too long talking about it again. But of course, they also put in what I would call my dystopian vision or imagination. I don't have to talk about this again. I normally have this at the end, but I just stuck it at the beginning because I thought that would make more sense. So again, and that's sort of what I have to say. So no, it's not quite what I have to say. What I have to say is that understanding food's unique power to shape our lives, and unique positioning in our lives, unique sort of ability to connect us, unique ability to reveal the world to us, unique ability to exchange it with nature, to be mediating nature, all of these things. It's so powerful. By value to create a better Sitopia. As I've said several times now, the better Sitopia, or a good Sitopia, is very close to utopia. We can build a better Sitopia together. So thank you so much to the project.
I was wondering, one of the questions that came by on one of the slides is the question, what is the good life? Can people hear me? What is the good life? And I was wondering, how and where can we make more space to discuss this question? Because it seems that is the question where we maybe should start.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Lots. No, thank you so much. That is my question. It's always been my question. With all this food and city stuff, it's interesting because I used to be an architect, as I possibly failed to explain slightly, but I know we're recovering architect now. But it's very interesting to me that architects, you study for 7 years, you do all sorts of stuff from environment to construction to heating to history to theory. At no point in that 7-year journey did anyone say, let's discuss what we're trying to do here. And yeah, I promise you, we did it. Because there's too much else to think about. You know, it's like the Shaw guy said, you know, when I said it, basically, when I see philosophy, that's exactly what I was saying. He nearly killed me. He was really cross. So I find this really fascinating. I'm actually working on a book at the moment that is, I say, both my books, you know, get to actually address themselves to this question primarily, although not necessarily. I'm at Sinopia more. I didn't really have my head there. But I mean, the second book, Sinopia, is much more philosophical, much more explicit, does answer that question. But I think it's really critical when we ask it now, because we're living in a sort of, if you know, the sort of hockey stick Ralph phenomenon. Thank you. That one. That's more historical material, that's more philosophical, what is good, I think. You know, it seems to me, and the reason I love the history and I find it so fascinating, you know, I also find the sort of the lens of Vliet so powerful, is that the questions I say haven't changed. You know, how to eat, how to live, how to create a good society, they are, you know, they're ancient questions. And also, as I've been sort of researching a lot into indigenous groups and Montgomery groups and so on, it occurred to me that all the things that are present in their life, I said it right at the beginning of the talk, you know, closeness to nature, high levels of agency, you know, good health, basic health, lots of time, and a sense of dwelling time, are things that we've sequentially lost in our journey towards, you know, more sort of technologically enabled life. Which, and by the way, don't get me wrong, I mean, you know, I got my kind of computer, my internet, blah, blah, blah. But I'm lucky enough to have been born before any of that existed. I consider it really fortunate. I remember, I've just been writing books, I remember spending Sunday afternoons looking at 2 raindrops on window and betting which one was going to reach the bottom pane first. That was kind of entertainment for Sunday, you know. And that is a great, great gift, to be able to be entertained by 2 raindrops, you know. And I think we're really losing a sense of what it means to be human. And I think food sits at the core of the kinds of sets of things that we need to think about, concentrate on getting back. Because what we're going to need to do in the next 5-10 years, urgently actually, is to reinforce the human, you know, make the human possible, social interaction, listening, understanding, reading, thinking. I mean, they're all disappearing, they're all under attack. And if we lose that, it's game over. Climate change, climate change, it won't matter, because we will have lost our humanity. So it's becoming for me incredibly urgent, very rapidly, the need to do this. I mean, the short answer, by the way, to a good life is, in my view, of course, everyone's got a different view. That's why I show that image of, you know, sorry, in my head, the slides are there, but I want them. So I'm bunch of things you can't see. But so that's being an architect, it's all kind of spatially locked. But on the Soylent guide, do you remember the sort of the Soylent? So here's our idea of a good life is not to have to think about food at all. Although very ironically, having a replicated food in his life, he likes to go out for a restaurant meal. So it's like, mate, what you actually say, you know, which is if I have those ways. But it's high levels of skill, agency, meaning, sociability, closeness to nature, you know, a worthwhile job, something to do that you know, Maslow's pyramid is that. And which is weekly providing that for everyone. And I think it's going to become urgent. I mean, how are we deal with the fact that 5 billionaires are going to basically have control of, you know, 2/3 of the jobs available and all the profits? Yeah, I mean, it's just so much. We need to reinforce the human, and we can do that individually, do it together. The ideal is the government will help us, but you know, that's eventually. But in essence, it's going back to the primal.
So, yeah. And key one message, first 25 verses more or less.
We have 2 days more. We go to main base, we go to Rijkswaan, we go to Koppert. So we're not done yet. But we've been doing this for quite some years now. And every time it strikes me that people like you reserve 3 days in their agenda to learn more about the way vegetables are really produced. And like you said, I think we're talking about the essence of our resistance bit. The way we use our food, specifically vegetables, provides new and health, provides planetary health. However, after doing this for 5 years, we start asking questions to the company to do it the other way around. I mean, society shows interest in what reasonable production is all about. I'm a bit in doubt about our sector. The sector, I think 50% of people here represent the sector of vegetable production. We don't show that much interest in society and in politics. What would you recommend after 2 days of this program? 50% of those people, how should we connect?
Well, I think partly, I mean, to be honest, and I'm not educating you to say this, but I think what you're doing here, what Stijn is doing in this company, it's a big part of the way forward. So you're inviting people in, you're providing a social, but here, we're a company having a meeting, a conversation. I think that's fantastic. And you're also reaching out, so I think, we need a cultural shift. And I think, so this is what fascinates me about the, if you like, the two very human reactions to the question of how should we eat, how should we live. If you like, one tendency is to say, escape the problem, just heck it, and then step aside and lead a good heart here. And the other side is embrace it and realize that this is what gives life all its meaning, all its pleasure. And they're different mindsets. And I think we need to work on the mindset. There's actually Epicurus, who's, by the way, incredibly misunderstood and misrepresented because people, Epicureanism in the UK means people who like kosh food, literally. And Epicurus says breaking water is enough if you're hungry enough. The cue is get hungry, and then the food will give you as much pleasure as any food will ever give you. So we've forgotten the deep meaning behind these figures who get bounded around. We need to change it. We had this conversation last night. Conversation was better over a glass of wine, but we did. Aart, we said, our problem as humans is that, as soon as we've got another comfort, another sort of a faster iPhone, the thing that thrilled us to bits 2 months ago is we immediately ratchet on our expectations. And it's what's the next one? This is terrible. This is disruptive. And of course, it's what capitalism depends on because it's headless. My I had a gas stove, but it's 80 years old. So those gas companies made money out of the fact that I cook every day. So that's deft capitalism. So I think this is why I'm interested in a sort of economy based on food, because I think an economy based on food, based value where it actually resides. And in terms of, the mindset shift of me, I think it's already happening. School kids going, there's big farms and so on. We need a much more radical shift than that. My pillars, to be perfectly honest, is to internalize the true cost of food production. And it's revolutionary because basically, the cost of artisanally produced local seasonal food would not increase at all because that already bears the true cost of food production. The cost of all other food the cost of pork dumble roughly. The cost of, obviously, industrially reduced livestock, so if you got 100 times, we would be able to afford to eat an Titanic 12 grams of, blah, blah, but some of us had a large. But, it's a cultural shift. I think the moment is coming. If we can offer the idea of living better in a link closer to nature, eat more healthily and so on, if that can be, it is big, but presented more broadly, if you can get governments, if you on board with this message, which they need to, by the way, it will become seen. I love your quote about Buckminster Fuller with the rudder. Literally, I've also got a big shit sort of thing that I say, but it's not a rudder, it's a lifeboat. So we're on the Titanic, we're heading towards the iceberg, we've already hit it basically. But, my thing is we need to make better lifeboats. Because if you make a sexy lifeboat that's also got an orchestra and champagne on it, people will leave the Titanic earlier and get on a lifeboat. So, it's basically building better lifeboats. And I think that's what everyone in this room is here to discuss and try to do. But the time is right, it's now. And it's becoming urgent, so I think people are feeling it. So I think those of us who've been banging on in the desert for 25 years and this is thing, they are listening back.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I think for the Q&A, we'll leave it at this now. I'll gladly hand it over to you because the talk section is now completed, is now done. So the only thing I want to say to you is that during the drinks later on, please don't hesitate to come to Carolyn or come to any of the partners from the project. They're all here now. They'll have stories and experience to share, to tell. And most especially have the artists that can be part of the program also with us. I'm just gonna highlight them one more time. I'm sorry if you guys don't mind it, but I think it's interesting to have these conversations because they are usually in places like this. So Leroen is here with us from Vegetable Vendetta. And Nicholas is here with us, the low tech game, so sort of the opposite of what many of the companies here are trying to do. You're here with us on the sensory food and at Digital Food. But and am I forgetting somebody now? I don't think so. Yeah, of course, and SMEs. We have SMEs with us as well. Isagree and Axia, who have been part of this program. And that's all I wanted to say. So then the last word is yours. Stijn, thank you very much for booking. Yeah.